She crossed a line and called it harmless. I called it the beginning of the end. I just didn't realize it at the time. When Claire and I started dating, it was all about connection, real conversations, shared values, that effortless rhythm you only find with someone who genuinely sees you. She laughed at my terrible impressions. I listened to her long-winded stories about the chaos at her design studio. We respected each other. That was the cornerstone of what we had. Or so I believed. The first crack was barely noticeable, a party, casual. Her arm lingered a little too long on a coworker's shoulder. She said it was harmless, just a joke. I didn't want to be the jealous boyfriend, so I brushed it off. Maybe I was imagining things. But that line, the invisible one we all have in relationships, the one marked "respect me," she started stepping over it more frequently. She'd make flirtatious comments about strangers right in front of me. Sometimes she'd text her exes, claiming it was just catching up. I voiced my discomfort more than once. I wasn't angry. I was honest, calm. I thought if I explained how it felt, she'd understand. Instead, she'd laugh it off. "You're overthinking, James. It's not like I'm cheating on you." Maybe that was true, but intent wasn't the only issue. It was the disregard. The way she trivialized my feelings, brushed them aside like I was being dramatic. And after each dismissal, a piece of me chipped away. You don't lose trust all at once. It dissolves, slowly, like sand slipping through fingers. I remember the moment I knew something was off. Not dramatic, just quiet. We were out to dinner with friends, and Claire was glowing, magnetic. But not for me. She was leaning into some guy across the table, eyes sparkling, touching his wrist when she laughed. I watched in silence, feeling more like a spectator than a partner. Later that night, I brought it up. She rolled her eyes. "It was just friendly. You're being insecure." Insecure. That word hung in the air like smoke, a cheap way to flip the blame. It was always that, my fault for feeling, not her fault for causing it. I started to question myself. Was I really being too sensitive? Was I asking for too much? But deep down, I knew better. I've always believed that when you love someone, you respect their boundaries even when they seem silly to you. That's the deal. Claire was breaking it, little by little, and calling it harmless. I didn't confront her with anger. That wasn't my style. I watched, I listened, I measured every word and every shift in her tone. And though I stayed, though I tried to believe it was just a phase, something inside me had already started to detach. She hadn't broken anything yet. Not fully, but the cracks were spreading, and soon there'd be no way to ignore them. It happened on a Thursday night. Nothing about the day hinted that my relationship was about to unravel. I came home to the scent of her favorite vanilla candles, a bottle of wine already open, on the counter, and music humming softly from the speakers. Ella Fitzgerald, Claire's go-to when she wanted to feel cozy. She was in the kitchen, smiling like everything was fine. It was the kind of moment that used to make me believe we were unshakable. But that night, the illusion shattered. We were invited to a colleague's birthday party, someone from Claire's office I barely knew but had met in passing. She insisted we go, said it would be good for us to get out, to be social. I agreed. I wanted to be supportive. I still believed somehow that if we just kept showing up for each other, everything might settle back into place. Claire looked beautiful, effortlessly so. She wore a deep emerald dress, the color that always brought out the green in her eyes. Her laugh filled the room the moment we arrived. She moved through the crowd like someone untethered, alive in a way that used to be reserved for just the two of us. And then there was him, Daniel. I remembered him vaguely from one of her team meetings I'd been dragged to months ago. He was the kind of man people gravitated toward. Loud, confident, perpetually amused with himself. Claire had mentioned him before in passing, always with a casual tone. But that night I noticed the shift. The way her eyes lit up when he approached. The way her hand grazed his arm when she laughed. They shared inside jokes I had never heard. She leaned in too close, too often. And each time I saw her do it, it felt like the room around us got colder. I didn't make a scene. I watched. I smiled when I had to, but I saw everything. I noticed how she barely acknowledged me as the night wore on, how Daniel whispered something in her ear, and she giggled like a teenager, brushing him away playfully. But not before her fingers lingered at his waist. That touch wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, intimate. We left early. At least I thought we did. Claire said she needed air and wanted to stay outside for a bit. I told her I'd wait in the car. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, I stepped out, walked around the corner of the building, and that's when I saw them. She was pressed against the wall, his face far too close to hers, and her hand rested on his chest like it belonged there. They weren't kissing, not yet, but they didn't need to. The damage had already been done. When she saw me, her expression didn't shift in fear or guilt. It flickered with irritation, like I was intruding on something private. I didn't speak. I didn't yell. I simply turned around and walked back to the car. She followed me in silence, climbing into the passenger seat like nothing had happened. I didn't look at her. I didn't ask her to explain. The drive home was cold, filled only with the sound of tires on wet pavement and the quiet click of her adjusting the radio, pretending everything was normal. Back at the apartment, she finally spoke. Her voice was light, dismissive, like she was discussing a minor misunderstanding. "James, come on. He's just a friend. We were talking. It's harmless." There it was again. That word, harmless, as if physical closeness meant nothing, as if boundaries were suggestions, not agreements, as if the sight of my partner entertaining the attention of another man in a way she used to reserve for me was something I should simply accept. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I saw a stranger. The woman who once made me feel grounded, now made me question my own reality. "No," I said quietly. "It's not harmless." She rolled her eyes, her voice rising. "You're overreacting. You always do this. I didn't do anything wrong." But that was the problem. She didn't think she had. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't going to win an argument that required her to care about something she didn't value anymore. It wasn't about Daniel. It wasn't even about that night. It was about what she showed me when she didn't flinch at being caught. When she minimized my pain. When she decided that the emotional safety of our relationship was less important than a flirtation she couldn't resist. The line had been crossed, not with a kiss or an affair, but with a choice. A choice to disregard everything we'd built for the sake of a moment that meant nothing to her, but everything to me. And that's when I knew. It was already over. The silence after that night said more than any argument could have. Claire and I coexisted in the same space, like two people who had forgotten how to speak the same language. The warmth was gone, replaced by an awkward politeness that neither of us acknowledged aloud. She moved through the apartment like nothing had happened, humming as she got ready for work, making her usual green smoothies, texting on the couch like she always did. But for me, everything had changed. I didn't storm out. I didn't throw her things into bags or demand explanations she was incapable of giving. I didn't raise my voice. That wasn't who I was. I wasn't interested in breaking dishes or fighting for a version of the truth she would only twist into something convenient. I simply stopped investing, stopped explaining, stopped hoping. A switch had flipped inside me, and I understood something I hadn't fully realized until that moment. People don't just fall out of love all at once. Sometimes love erodes when respect dies. It dissolves slowly, and then, in one final moment of clarity, you feel the emptiness where certainty used to live. I spent the next few days watching her closely, not because I wanted to catch her doing something worse, but because I was trying to find a reason to stay. I wanted to see a crack in the mask, a flash of remorse she hadn't dared show that night. I wanted to believe she was just lost, that maybe she would come to me with tears and accountability. But none of that happened. Instead, she acted like we were just in a temporary lull, like things would go back to normal once I got over it. But I wasn't going to get over it, because it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a fundamental failure of respect. The worst part wasn't her behavior. It was the casual way she dismissed it, the way she minimized my pain, as though I was the one making too much of nothing. That attitude, that inability or unwillingness to empathize, was what made my decision so clear. She had rewritten the rules of our relationship in her head, made exceptions for herself, and expected me to follow along without protest. On a Sunday morning, as she scrolled through her phone, laughing at something I wasn't part of, I looked across the kitchen table and knew I had already left her emotionally. I was just waiting for the right moment to make it real. I didn't need a big finale. I wasn't chasing closure. I needed peace. So I started preparing in quiet, private ways. I called my friend Nate, asked if his guest room was still available. I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer, not to start a war, but to understand the cleanest way to walk away. I backed up my files, cleared out personal belongings from shared spaces, and began disentangling myself from the life we had once built together. One night, while she was in the shower, I stood in the hallway staring at the door. I could hear the water running, her humming a tune. I used to love that sound. It meant she was relaxed, happy, comfortable. Now it just felt like background noise to someone else's story. I didn't leave that night, but I knew then I would soon. When I finally told her, I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply sat down on the edge of the bed, looked her in the eyes, and said, "This isn't working anymore." At first she laughed, thinking it was a joke. Then her face shifted when she saw I wasn't blinking. "You're serious?" she asked. "Yes," I said calmly. "I'm leaving." "What, because of that stupid party?" "James, you're blowing this way out of proportion." That was the moment I knew there was nothing left to salvage. It wasn't even about the party. It was about everything that came after. The way she responded, or more accurately, didn't respond. Her refusal to take responsibility. Her complete lack of accountability. That was what made the relationship impossible to return to. I didn't offer her a speech or a list of reasons. I didn't ask her to see things from my point of view anymore. That door had already closed. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. "You keep calling it harmless," I said, "but it cost you something you'll never get back." She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, stunned, like she didn't know what to do with the finality of my voice. And that was the difference between us. She thought love could survive on habit, that it would just bend around her mistakes. But I knew better. I knew that once you cross certain lines, even love can't find its way back. So I packed a bag. Just the essentials. I left the shared keys on the counter and walked out of the apartment we used to. Call home. No dramatic goodbye. No second thoughts. As I closed the door behind me, the weight I'd been carrying for weeks lifted. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel anger. Just clarity. A clean break. The kind that doesn't leave you shattered. Only steady. I didn't need her to understand. I needed to choose myself. The day after I left, Claire called me 12 times. I didn't answer. Each call came within minutes of the last, as if the urgency in her voicemail would somehow undo the silence I'd chosen. When the calls didn't work, she moved on to messages. Long, rambling ones, apologies sandwiched between justifications. She said she didn't realize I was that upset. She claimed it was a misunderstanding, that I'd taken it too far by walking out. Her words spun in circles, full of everything, but the one thing I needed to hear. Accountability. I read the messages once, just to be sure I wasn't missing something, then deleted them. Not out of anger, but necessity. If I kept reading, I might start doubting myself. I might allow nostalgia to whisper its dangerous comforts. But I wasn't interested in revisiting the past. I had already lived it. This was about moving forward. A few days later, she asked if we could meet in person. I hesitated. Part of me feared the confrontation, not because I expected a fight, but because I worried it might shake my resolve. Claire had always been persuasive when she wanted to be. She knew how to soften her tone, how to wrap apologies in tears and memories, how to reach for my hand and make me question everything. But this wasn't one of those times. I wasn't the same man who had sat silently beside her, wondering what else she might be hiding behind that dismissive smile. I agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop halfway between her place and Nate's, where I'd been staying. I arrived early, choosing a table in the far corner, away from the soft chatter and steaming espresso machines. When she walked in, I recognized the look on her face. It was the same look she'd given me the night I told her I was leaving. Half shock, half calculation, like she was still trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation she no longer held. She sat across from me, folding her hands neatly on the table, the way she used to do when she had something serious to say. I waited in silence. I wasn't going to rescue the conversation. "I've been thinking about what happened," she began, voice low but steady. "And I think we both made mistakes." I didn't flinch. I'd anticipated the shared blame tactic, but I wasn't here to debate the past. "I should have respected your boundaries more," she continued. "I didn't realize how much it hurt you until you left." I nodded slightly. "And now you do?" She hesitated. "Yes, I think I do. And I want to make it right." I looked at her carefully, not with resentment, but with the clarity that comes after stepping away from a toxic pattern. "Claire," I said, my voice calm but firm, "this isn't something that can be fixed with a few words. This wasn't just one mistake. It was a pattern. And what's worse, you didn't take it seriously until I left." She looked wounded, like I'd slapped her with the truth. "So that's it? You're just done?" I didn't answer immediately. I took a breath, not to stall, but to make sure every word was intentional. "Yes, I'm done. Because I gave you so many chances to understand how I felt, and each time you told me I was overreacting. You called it harmless. That told me everything I needed to know." Claire looked away, blinking hard. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she whispered, "I didn't think it would break us." "That's the thing," I replied. "You didn't think it would cost you anything, but it did." There was nothing left to say. No emotional outburst, no plea, no grand declaration. The silence between us now was different. It wasn't the kind that asked for more. It was final. She tried one last time. "I don't want to lose you." "You already did," I said quietly, "the moment you stopped protecting what we had." We parted with no hug, no promise to keep in touch. Just a nod from me and a blank stare from her. As I walked away, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt relief. True endings rarely come with fanfare. They come with stillness. The moment you stop explaining, stop hoping, stop fighting for something that's already gone. That was our final goodbye. Clean, inevitable, and far overdue. Later that evening, she sent one last message. It simply said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." I didn't respond, because it was never about whether she knew. It was about the fact that she never cared enough to ask. And that's when I knew with complete certainty, walking away wasn't an escape. It was a return to myself, to my values, to peace. Claire could call it harmless 1,000 times more. But for me, it would always be the end. It's strange how quickly the world keeps turning after something ends. You imagine that heartbreak will stop time, that the quiet of a relationship's collapse will echo loudly in the background of your everyday life. But it doesn't. The sun still rises, emails keep coming. People keep laughing at things that don't matter. And eventually, you learn to participate again. One small choice at a time. I didn't go looking for distractions in the immediate aftermath. I didn't jump into someone else's arms or book a trip to find myself. I simply returned to my life, alone but whole. The quiet of being by myself was unfamiliar at first, but not unkind. There was a peace in it, an honesty. For the first time in years, I didn't have to second-guess what someone else meant by their words or measure my own to avoid conflict. I could just be. Claire tried to reach out a few more times. A text on my birthday. A photo she said she stumbled across from our vacation in Maine. Little things designed to plant a seed, to suggest that maybe we'd made a mistake. But I didn't respond. Not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. I had already fought for that relationship. I had already offered every reasonable chance to rebuild. What I got in return wasn't effort. It was evasion. And I had made a promise to myself the night I walked out. Never again would I stay somewhere I wasn't seen. There's something people rarely talk about when it comes to heartbreak. How empowering it is when you finally choose yourself. Not in the reactive way, not to prove a point, but in the quiet, everyday decision to protect your peace. I didn't want revenge. I didn't need her to suffer or regret. I just needed to live a life that no longer carried the weight of someone else's emotional carelessness. Some of our mutual friends didn't know how to react. A few stayed in touch. Others disappeared into the social fog that forms when people don't want to take sides. I understood. Everyone has their own comfort zones. What mattered most was that I was no longer compromising mine. Over time, the hurt faded. Not because it was erased, but because I stopped feeding it. I stopped replaying her laugh with him, her hand on his chest, the way she looked at me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be cherished. I didn't forget those moments, but I let them rest. They were no longer part of my daily narrative. They were a chapter I had finished, not a story I was still trapped inside. Eventually, I started noticing the small joys again. Morning coffee on the porch without tension. Music that didn't remind me of her. Running into people who made me feel like myself again. And then, slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. Not hope for a new relationship. Not yet. But hope that I could trust my instincts again. That I wasn't broken or too guarded. That I could let someone in someday and still feel safe. Claire called it harmless, but I know what it really was. It was the final crack in a foundation she had long neglected, and while she may live with the echo of what she lost, I live with the strength of what I found. Myself, unburdened. Free. That's the aftermath. Not devastation. Not revenge. Just quiet freedom. And in the end, that was all I ever wanted.